My girlfriend was raped and got pregnant, but I'm breaking up with her because she wants to keep the baby and I don't want to raise a rapist child. My name's Mike, I'm 30, and I live just outside of Chicago. I've been with my girlfriend, Sarah, for 3 years now. Honestly, she's everything to me. She's kind, ridiculously smart, and has this way of lighting up a room without even trying. She's the type of person who remembers every little detail about people, like how I hate cilantro or how I always lose my keys. She'll just show up with a spare keychain or a killer plate of tacos, no cilantro, and it's like she just knows how to take care of me without making a big deal out of it. For context, Sarah and I have always been pretty outdoorsy. Well, she's the real athlete. I just tag along to feel less like a couch potato. She's been into running for years and has this routine where she jogs every morning at a park near our apartment. It's this quiet little spot with a big lake in the middle, lots of trees, and a trail that loops around the whole thing. She loves it there, and honestly, I've always felt good knowing she had her morning me time in a place that felt so peaceful. But one morning, a few months ago, everything changed. It was a Saturday, and she'd left for her usual run around 7 a.m. I didn't think much of it. She's usually back in about an hour, sweaty and grinning, asking if I want coffee. But that morning, by 8:30, she still wasn't home. At first, I told myself she probably just decided to do an extra lap or maybe ran into someone she knew. I texted her, "Hey, all good." No response. Then I called her, straight to voicemail. That's when my gut started twisting. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being paranoid. But by 9, I was freaking out. Finally, at 9:15, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. When I picked up, all I could hear was her crying. Not just crying, sobbing so hard she couldn't even get words out. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. I kept saying, "Sarah, where are you? Are you okay? Talk to me." Eventually, she managed to get out that she was at the park, near the entrance. I didn't even grab my jacket. I just bolted out the door and drove like a maniac to get to her. When I got there, she was sitting on a bench, hugging herself, her face buried in her knees. She looked so small. I sat down next to her, put my arm around her, and asked her what happened. At first, she wouldn't say anything. She just kept shaking her head and whispering, I can't. I told her it was okay, that she didn't have to say anything until she was ready. But after a few minutes, she finally told me. She'd been attacked. Some guy had jumped out from behind the trees while she was on a quiet stretch of the trail. He assaulted her. I don't want to get into the details. Honestly, I'm still struggling to process them myself, but it was bad. Really bad. She said she managed to get away when another runner came by and scared him off. But by then, the damage was done. I don't think I've ever felt so many emotions at once. Anger, fear, helplessness, guilt. I wanted to find a guy, and while I'm not going to lie, my first instinct wasn't exactly rational. But Sarah begged me not to call the police. She said she just wanted to go home and forget it ever happened. I didn't understand. I mean, how could she not want to report it? But I also didn't want to push her. So I drove her home, and we sat on the couch for hours. She cried until she couldn't anymore, and I just held her, feeling completely useless. The weeks that followed were, honestly, they were hell. Sarah stopped being Sarah. She couldn't sleep without waking up screaming. She barely ate. She wouldn't leave the apartment. She'd always been so vibrant, so full of life, and now it was like the light had gone out of her. I did everything I could think of, cooked her favorite meals, sat with her through every nightmare, told her over and over that I loved her and that I wasn't going anywhere. But nothing seemed to help. She just kept slipping further and further away, and I didn't know how to bring her back. And then, just when I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, Sarah started feeling sick. At first, we thought it was just stress. It made sense, given everything she'd been through. But when the nausea didn't go away after a couple of weeks, she took a pregnancy test. I'll never forget the look on her face when she came out of the bathroom holding it. She didn't have to say a word. I knew. The test was positive. We went to the doctor to confirm, and well, it was exactly what we feared. The baby wasn't mine. It was his. I don't even know how to describe how I felt in that moment. It was like my brain just shut down. I mean, what are you even supposed to do with news like that? Sarah was sitting there in the doctor's office, staring at the floor like she was trying to disappear. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words just wouldn't come. I think I managed to squeeze her hand, but that was it. We drove home in complete silence. No music, no small talk, nothing. Just this unbearable weight sitting between us. Later that night, when we finally talked about it, Sarah said she wanted to terminate the pregnancy. I could tell it wasn't an easy decision for her. She looked so torn up about it. But she said she couldn't imagine carrying that man's child. She said it would be like reliving the attack every single day, and I completely understood. I told her I'd support her no matter what. We even started looking up clinics and making plans. For the first time in weeks, it felt like there was a way forward. But then, Linda happened. Okay, so a little backstory here. Linda is Sarah's mom. And let's just say she's a devout Catholic. Like the kind of Catholic who has a picture of the Pope in her living room and goes to church twice on Sundays. To be fair, she and Sarah have always been close. Linda's the type of mom who calls every day just to check in and sends random care packages of homemade cookies. But she's also intense. She has very strong opinions about what's right and wrong, and she's not exactly shy about sharing them. I guess Sarah felt like she needed to tell her mom what was going on, which in hindsight I get. I mean, it's her mom, right? But I was worried. I had a feeling Linda wouldn't take the news well. And surprise, surprise, I was right. After their phone call, Sarah was a wreck. She said her mom had cried, begged, and guilt tripped her for hours. Apparently, Linda told her that abortion was a mortal sin, and that if she went through with it, she'd be killing an innocent soul. She even threw in some line about how Sarah needed to be strong and trust in God's plan. I was furious. Like, I get that Linda has her beliefs, but to lay that kind of guilt on Sarah after everything she's been through, it made my blood boil. But Sarah, she's so much more tender-hearted than I am. I could see that her mom's words had gotten to her. The next day, she told me she wasn't sure about the abortion anymore. She said she needed time to think. That was the start of the biggest fight Sarah and I have ever had. I didn't yell or anything. I mean, I knew she was dealing with a lot. But I was firm. I told her flat out that I couldn't raise this child. I couldn't do it. Every time I thought about the baby, all I could see was him. The man who hurt her. The man who turned our lives into this nightmare. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't be part of this if she decided to keep the baby. It wasn't fair to her, it wasn't fair to me, and it sure as hell wouldn't be fair to the child. I gave her an ultimatum, which, looking back, probably wasn't the smartest move. I said, if you keep it, we're done. But if you terminate, we'll get through this together. As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. I mean, who wants to be the guy who gives his girlfriend an ultimatum about something like this? But at the same time, I couldn't lie to her. I had to be honest about where I stood. Sarah didn't take it well. She accused me of being selfish, of not understanding what she was going through. And maybe she was right. I mean, I'll never fully understand what it's like to be in her shoes. But I also knew that I couldn't compromise on this. It was a deal breaker for me. After a couple of days of tense, painful conversations, Sarah made her decision. She told me she was going to keep the baby. And just like that, we were done. I packed a bag and left. I stayed at my buddy Jake's place for a while, trying to process everything. I hated myself for leaving her when she was so vulnerable, but I also knew I couldn't stay. It felt like the end of everything we'd built together. After I left, it was like my whole world went on autopilot. I was crashing at Jake's place, sleeping on his lumpy couch and pretending to be fine when inside. I felt like I was being ripped apart. Jake tried to get me out of the house. He'd drag me to bars, make me join his rec league basketball games, but my head wasn't in it. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. Was she okay? Was she eating? Was she regretting her decision? A million questions kept running through my head, but I didn't reach out. I figured she needed space, and honestly, I wasn't sure if she even wanted to hear from me after how we left things. Then, about 2 weeks after we split, I got a text from Sarah. It was short and to the point. Can we talk? My heart just about stopped when I saw it. I didn't know if that meant she was mad, or if she wanted to yell at me, or if... I don't know. But I wasn't about to ignore her. I called her back immediately, and when she picked up, her voice was shaky. She told me she'd been thinking a lot about everything, and that she wanted to meet in person. I agreed, of course, and we decided to meet up the next day at her apartment. Walking into that apartment felt like walking into a ghost town. All my little things were still there, my coffee mug on the counter, my hoodie on the back of the couch, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Sarah looked tired, like really tired. I could tell she'd been crying a lot, but she still managed a small smile when she saw me. We sat down, and she just started talking. She said she'd been feeling completely overwhelmed, like she was being pulled in a million directions at once. She told me her mom had been calling her nonstop, saying she was making a huge mistake by even considering an abortion. And then she dropped the bomb. Linda had told her that if she went through with terminating the pregnancy, she would cut Sarah out of her life completely. I was stunned. I mean, I knew Linda was hardcore about her beliefs, but to threaten her own daughter like that? It was next-level manipulative. Sarah said the thought of losing her mom was tearing her apart. She didn't know how to handle it. I could feel myself getting angry, but I tried to stay calm. I told her that this was her decision, not her mom's, not mine, not anyone else's. I said that no matter what Linda said, I would support her, but she had to do what was right for herself. Not for me, not for her mom, but for Sarah. We talked for hours that night, like the kind of deep, soul-bearing conversations that leave you emotionally drained, but also kind of relieved. She told me how scared she was, how guilty she felt, how she couldn't stop hearing her mom's voice in her head. I told her about my fears too, how I wasn't sure if I could get past what the pregnancy represented, how much I hated myself for giving her an ultimatum, how much I missed her. When I left that night, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It felt like we'd made progress, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. Then, a few days later, Sarah called me. She sounded different this time, more calm, more certain. She said she'd made her decision. She was going to terminate the pregnancy. I was relieved, obviously, but I could tell how hard it had been for her to come to that conclusion. She told me she'd spoken to Linda again, and when she told her mom about her decision, Linda absolutely lost it. She screamed, she cried, she begged, and when none of that worked, she told Sarah she was cutting ties. Just like that. Sarah said she felt like she'd been punched in the gut, but at the same time, she also felt free. Like for the first time in her life, she wasn't living for her mom's approval. The day of the procedure, I was there for her every step of the way. I held her hand in the waiting room, drove her home afterward, and stayed up all night watching her sleep to make sure she was okay. When she woke up the next morning, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for being here, for not giving up on me." I don't think I've ever felt closer to her than I did in that moment. Things started to feel like they were settling down after that. Sarah was still fragile, but there was this lightness in her I hadn't seen in months. She told me she felt like she could finally breathe again, like the weight of everything wasn't crushing her anymore. We talked more openly than we ever had before about the attack, about her mom, about us. It felt like we were rebuilding brick by brick, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a shot at getting back to normal. Or at least a new kind of normal. But of course, nothing could be that simple. Enter Linda. I knew Linda wasn't going to take Sarah's decision lying down. I mean, this is the same woman who once refused to speak to Sarah for a week because she skipped Sunday Mass to study for finals. But I wasn't prepared for just how far she'd go. About a week after the procedure, there was a knock on our door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing there. My stomach dropped immediately. One of them asked if I was Mike and if Sarah was home. I called Sarah over, and the look on her face when she saw them, man, I'll never forget it. She went pale as a sheet, like she thought she was about to get arrested or something. The officers explained that they'd received a call from a concerned party. They didn't say who, but come on, we both knew it was Linda, claiming that Sarah was in an abusive relationship. According to the report, I was controlling, manipulative, and had supposedly coerced her into making medical decisions against her will. I was floored. Like, what the actual hell? Sarah was stunned too, but she quickly assured them that it wasn't true. She told them everything about the attack, the pregnancy, her mom's reaction, the abortion. She even said, if anything, Mike's the only reason I've made it through all of this. He's been my rock. The officers were polite, but thorough. They asked Sarah a lot of questions, and I could see how drained she was by the end of it. Eventually, they told us that everything seemed fine and that they wouldn't be pursuing it further. But they left us with a warning. If they got another call, they'd have to investigate again. It was humiliating, infuriating, and just exhausting. I couldn't believe Linda had stooped so low. After the cops left, Sarah broke down. She kept saying, "How could she do this to me? She's my mom. She's supposed to love me." I didn't know what to say. I mean, how do you explain something like that? All I could do was hold her and tell her that none of this was her fault. But Linda wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, she kept calling and texting Sarah, trying to guilt her into reconciling. She'd leave these long, dramatic voicemails about how Sarah was choosing a man over her family and how she was lost to sin. At one point, she even sent a letter, like an actual handwritten letter, where she accused me of brainwashing Sarah and ruining her life. It was next level unhinged. Eventually, Sarah had enough. She blocked her mom's number, deleted the voicemails, and threw the letter in the trash without even finishing it. I could tell it broke her heart to do it, but she said she couldn't take the toxicity anymore. "I need to focus on myself," she told me one night. "And on us. I can't keep letting her control me." That was a turning point for both of us. Sarah started going to therapy, which has been such a game changer for her. She's learning how to set boundaries, how to process her trauma, how to take care of herself. And for me, it's been a lesson in patience, in listening, in being there without trying to fix everything. We're not perfect, far from it, but we're working on it, together. Fast forward a couple of months, and things are finally starting to feel manageable. Sarah was making progress in therapy, little by little. She wasn't back to her old self yet, but she was getting there. She started going out again, meeting up with friends, even jogging at the park. Though now she only went with me or in a group. The nightmares were less frequent, and she was smiling more. Not the forced, "I'm fine" kind of smile she'd been using for months, but real ones, the kind that reminded me of why I fell in love with her in the first place. As for me, I was learning too. I realized that I didn't have to have all the answers or fix everything for her. Sometimes, just being there was enough. I started going to therapy myself. At first, it was just to figure out how to be a better partner to Sarah, but it ended up being way more helpful than I expected. Turns out I had a lot of my own stuff to unpack: guilt, anger, fear. Therapy gave me a space to process all of it without dumping it on Sarah, which I think made me a better support system for her.